let's say you're coding in Java, and you have a fixed set of choices, right? Like the status of some process. How do you actually handle the logic for that? Well, you could build a long if-else chain, or you could use a switch statement. Now, one of these is way cleaner, it's safer, and it's definitely the best practice. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly why.
So picture this. You're tracking something in your application. It can be running, maybe it failed, it could be pending, or it could be a success. Your code needs to do something different for each of those states. This is a super common problem for developers, and it brings up a really important question. What's the cleanest, most solid way to manage these fixed states in our code? Is there a better way?
So here's our game plan. First, we'll do a quick refresher on what enums even are. Then, we're going to look at the if-else approach, the old standby. After that, we'll see the switch solution in action. Then comes the fun part. We'll put them head-to-head for a direct comparison. And finally, we'll lock in the key takeaways that you'll want to remember. All right, let's dive right into section 1. What are enums? We're really talking about the foundation of what we call type-safe constants.
Okay, so an enum is basically a special Java type that lets you create a fixed group of constants. The huge win here is something called type safety. See, instead of using messy strings like running in quotes, where you could make a typo, or numbers like 1, 2, 3, an enum forces you to pick from a pre-approved list. This makes your code so much safer and honestly a lot easier for you and others to read.
For all of our examples today, we're going to be using this super simple status enum. It lays out our 4 possible states: running, failed, pending, and success. This is the exact set of values we're going to be working with.
On to section 2, the if-else approach. Let's look at our first method. It's one we all know, but as you'll see, it can get a little wordy. So how does this classic handle our enums?
The logic is pretty straightforward. You know the drill. First, you've got your variable. In our case, it's a status variable. Then you just start a chain of checks. You use an if for the first option, then an else if for the next one, and another else if, and so on, until you finish with a final else, just to catch whatever's left.
Now, I want you to look really closely at the code here. To check our variable s, we have to write status.running, and then status.failed, and on and on. Do you see how the enum type status is repeated in every single line? This code works, it's totally valid, but that repetition, that's what we call a code smell. It makes the code verbose or wordy, and it's just harder to read at a glance.
So if else is so wordy, there has to be a better way, right? You bet. This brings us right into section 3, the switch solution. This is a much cleaner, much more elegant alternative.
But hang on. First, a really important question. We all know switch works great with numbers and strings, but can it handle our own custom status enum? The answer is a big, loud yes. In fact, it's practically designed to work perfectly with them.
And would you look at that? This is the result. We pass our s variable into the switch. Now look at the case labels. We just write running, failed, pending. That's it. Compare that to the if-else version. We don't have to keep repeating the status type name over and over. This is exactly why switch is so powerful for enums. It's just cleaner, more direct, and way easier to read.
And here's the cool reason why this works. The Java compiler is pretty smart. It already knows that the variable s is of type status, so you don't need to remind it on every single line. You can just use the constant name, like running, directly. It seems like a small syntax difference, but believe me, it has a huge impact on how clear your code is.
All right, time for the main event, section 4, the verdict. We've seen both methods. Now we're going to put them side by side to really answer the question, which one wins when it comes to enums? When you see the actual logic right next to each other, the difference is just stark. On the left, with if-else, your brain has to process s equals status.running. On the right, with switch, it just presents the case, running. The mental effort is so much lower, and you can instantly see what the code is trying to do. Let's break it down in a little table. Readability, switch is way higher. Verbosity, you know how much typing you have to do? If-else is high because you're always repeating status dot, while switch is nice and low. So this leads to a really clear conclusion. If-else is a great general-purpose tool for all sorts of conditions, but switch is specifically optimized for checking a variable against a fixed set of constants, which is the exact definition of an enum. All right, let's boil all this down into the most important points. We're on to section 5, key takeaways. If you are studying for a Java certification or maybe a university exam, this is the part you absolutely need to remember. Okay, here's your cheat sheet. Number 1, When you're working with enums, switch is the preferred choice, period. Number 2, in your case labels, you only use the constant's name, like running. You do not write status.running. They love to try and trick you with that on exams. 3, this makes your code less wordy and way more readable. And finally, and this is a pro tip, using a switch is like a form of documentation. It tells other programmers that you are intentionally handling every single possible state from that enum.
Look, if you only take one thing away from this whole explainer, please let it be this. As a best practice in modern Java, whenever you need to do different things based on the value of an enum, you should be using a switch statement. It is the clearest and most maintainable way to get the job done. And that brings us to the end. We've seen that for enums, the switch statement isn't just another option, it really is the superior solution for writing clear, intentional code. And that leads to my final thought for you. Today was all about enums, but where else in your code are you using these long, clunky if-else chains where a switch could bring so much more clarity and structure? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.